For more now on the deadly violence, we turn to CBS News security analyst and former assistant FBI director Ron Hosko, who is in our Washington bureau. So, Ron, you heard what Paula said about what she and others witnessed regarding the police response. What's your take on it?
You know, Elaine, it is common practice for law enforcement after a big event to hold what's known as an after-action review. And you have typically police leadership coming together with those contributors to the effort to look at what the intelligence was, understand what drove the police response, for better or for worse, and to share afterwards, here's where we think we were, here's where we think we could have done better, here's where in areas where we think we should improve. And that would affect both the Charlottesville Police Department, probably the county, the Sheriff's Department, responding law enforcement, and Virginia State Police, to really take a hard look at themselves and understand what the drivers were for their patrol and their preventative measures, equipment that they used, the internal communications, so that those on the ground could understand, look, here's what we knew, here's what we thought we were responding to, and certainly here's where we should have been better. And so I think it is probably premature for us to judge them without having a fuller understanding of what they thought they knew at the time. But most certainly, you know, these events can be looked at through 20/20 hindsight and say, look, you were guarding the statue, you were guarding the park, and the crowd movements were somewhere else, and the conflict was somewhere else. How do we be better in that? I'm sure nobody in the policing side will tell you we let this crowd attack each other, the pro and the anti-forces, deliberately. Some of this is going to be, where were we muscled up? Were we protecting police and property but not protecting citizens? So I think there's a lot to be learned here and a lot to be shared, and we'll know more about it as the days go forward.
Meantime, Ron, Ohio resident James Alex Fields was arrested and now faces a murder charge for driving his car through the crowd. How do law enforcement officials stop someone from using their vehicle as a weapon?
Well, we've seen this and the law enforcement discussion about this from ISIS attacks or ISIS-inspired attacks in Europe. And we've seen police departments here using Jersey barriers and blocking off streets with Jersey barriers or with salt trucks or snow plows in an effort to avoid this sort of activity. You know, so much of that is really dependent on police intelligence and having an understanding of crowd dynamics and offender capability and really understanding the threat. But here we see again where a fast-moving vehicle can do a lot of damage. Here it looks like at least one participant had just that intent. And so, again, you know, it's what law enforcement learns from it. Do they learn that, hey, we have to draw a bigger perimeter around where we think the conflict is going to be and harden that perimeter to prevent just this sort of activity? And I think it's going to be important for law enforcement to take a hard look at themselves, a hard look at what they knew. Was this sort of event, the use of a car as a weapon, predictable? And how do we not let this happen again? And it could be expanding those perimeters out, hardening those perimeters with just that sort of Jersey barrier or salt truck or snow plow or city bus, and block off an area where you can allow the protesters to protest lawfully, but then knowing when to cut it off and when to block it off.
So what you said there, Ron, I think is key. What are some of the signs that things at what may have started off as a peaceful assembly of people are about to take a dangerous turn at a protest rally?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is in my hand right here. And it is trying to get into the social media that people are using to organize the protest, understanding how many users are there, how many people will be pulled in by it, how they're communicating, and trying to do that in a lawful way. And you know, yesterday in talking to Rena about this event, you know, the FBI has been criticized in the past, you know, years past and decades past about being too aggressive and mounting a counterintelligence program look, this is trying to walk that line where people feel free to protest, free to use their First Amendment privileges, but then I think too, it's being smart about understanding what they're bringing to a protest. And when you see people with helmets and with clubs, and one of your videos is showing now somebody with aerosols that can be ignited very quickly to use to burn, what fluids are being brought to potentially harm somebody else. It is really trying to penetrate these groups, penetrate their communications, and understand this is far beyond the lawful First Amendment exercise. This is about combat.
Ron, as you know, the FBI and the Department of Justice are now launching a civil rights investigation into what happened in Charlottesville. Is that the standard with this kind of incident?
Yeah, you know, I think that, look, the FBI is very circumspect when it comes to the free exercise of First Amendment rights. And that is, you know, when you're talking about pure protest in the streets, it is about religion and the free exercise of religion. The FBI is, because they've been criticized in the past, very circumspect about their involvement and how far they go. And really what they're looking for is evidence of intent to commit crimes, intent to deprive somebody of their civil rights, very often using their unique jurisdiction that it relates to interstate transportation. And so you see that woven into these statutes. You see it in the federal civil rights statute when it's talking about conspiracy against rights. And at the back end of that, they're talking about people traveling or using interstate facilities to deprive others of their rights. So too often it looks like the FBI might be reactive here, but they want to not be criticized for being too aggressive, for depriving people of their rights. But very clearly now they will bring those federal resources to bear and see if there are extra federal charges that might be more appropriate than state charges. Very often you have crimes being committed by actors and the first opportunity to charge is a state charge. It might be vehicular manslaughter. And so the FBI will try to fill in those resources, bring the intelligence resources to bear, and see if federal prosecution is appropriate for some of these actors.
Finally, Ron, before I let you go, I'd like to look ahead to the free speech rally expected to take place in Boston next week. What kinds of things should law enforcement be looking for to ensure everyone's safety?
Well, undoubtedly, the Boston field office of the FBI will be talking to the Richmond field office that is engaged in this investigation today and trying to move them fast forward so that they are effectively prepared. You know, one of the nice things about a bigger police department, whether it's NYPD or Philly or Boston or Atlanta, is you have a lot more resources that are built into their capability. And so they will be looking this week at what happened in Richmond, trying to understand crowd dynamics, trying to look for those individuals who were pushing this forward to a conflict and trying to mitigate that in advance. Those crowd dynamics can be very difficult to predict, but make no mistake, there are actors coming from out of state that are very often the driving forces in a greater conflict. And they will be looking to interdict those folks on any potential charges and keep Boston from ending up like Charlottesville did yesterday.
All right, Ron Hosko in Washington for us. Ron, thanks very much for your insight.
Sure.